American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, both 767-200s, while the aircraft reported to have been used in the destruction of the World Trade Center. Pilots for 911truth have been able to obtain black box data from the National Transportation Safety Board, in which the NTSB claims to have come from United 93 and American 77. Thorough analysis of this data indicates many conflicts within the government story. Every government agency contacted refuses to comment. The black boxes for the aircraft reportedly used for the strike in New York City, however, do not exist. According to government agencies, the black boxes were never recovered, but according to other sources, they were. DeMasi and Ballone, two workers at Ground Zero, were tasked by the FBI to locate the black boxes. They claim 3 of the 4 were recovered. According to author Dave Lindorf, a source at the NTSB also states the recorders were recovered and given to the NTSB for analysis. The story dead ends there, as all government agencies, including the NTSB, now deny the existence of these recorders reportedly found at Ground Zero. What could these recorders have told us? Flight data recorders are built to withstand 3,400 Gs and temperatures of 1,100 degrees Celsius. The fact that people who worked at Ground Zero claim the recorders were found intact, and other sources claim the recorders were sent to the NTSB for analysis, this is just more evidence which conflicts with what we've been told, to add to the growing mountain of conflicting evidence. We don't expect the black boxes or the possible data they contain will ever be produced for the World Trade Center strike, so we will have to analyze data which is available. Since we do not have FDR data from the World Trade Center strike aircraft, we have to look elsewhere for any other type of data which may have been gathered and reported. One of the data sets we do have is position, speed, and a crude form of altitude data claimed to be from the 84th Radar Evaluation Squadron, also known as RADIES. Initially denied by the FAA, a backdoor FOIA request produced this RADIES radar data. Although reviewing altitude envelopes as compared to ASR radar with altitude reporting, also known as Mode C, and the fact the NTSB admits RADIES data can have potentially large errors, it's not prudent to use such information for precise analysis, as others have done. The NTSB also performed a radar data impact speed study, in which they claim to have used ASR radar, which is much more accurate than RADIES for calculating speed and altitude, especially when Mode C is available. The speeds cited for the strike aircraft exceed aircraft limitations set by the manufacturer for the aircraft reportedly used, unmodified, airline fleet, stock 767s. Can a 767 obtain such speeds? He calculates aircraft speed as 430 knots and 510 knots for American 11 and United 175 respectively, both reported as 767s. Those who make excuse for the government story attempt to cite Egyptair 990, a 767 which reportedly was an intentional crash by one of the flight crew, as precedent that a 767 can reach speeds reported for the aircraft which allegedly struck the World Trade Center. According to the NTSB, which is disputed by Egyptian investigators, Egyptair 990 first officer pushed the nose over to commit suicide, taking crew and passengers with him. During this dive, Egyptair 990 exceeded maximum operating speeds for a 767, which are 360 knots and 0.86 Mach. We will cover the reason for assigning 2 airspeed limitations shortly. The NTSB reports the flight data recorder from Egyptair 990 recorded a peak speed of 0.99 Mach at an altitude of 22,000 feet during its dive. 0.99 Mach is just below the speed of sound. Again, maximum operating speeds for a 767 are 360 knots and 0.86 Mach, respectively assigned as VMO, which is velocity max operating, and MMO, which is Mach max operating. Those who argue that since Egyptair 990 reached 0.99 Mach, exceeding 0.86, that certainly the World Trade Center aircraft could do the same. What these people fail to realize is the air density at different altitudes and the corresponding effects on an aircraft. Remember, Egyptair 990 reached its peak speed at 22,000 feet. World Trade Center aircraft were operating close to sea level. As you can see, when an aircraft descends, air pressure increases rapidly, directly increasing air density. There is a good reason Boeing assigns two airspeed for maximum operating limits. One is for lower altitude in this very dense air, in terms of knots, and the other for higher altitudes measured in Mach. The reason for this is air pressure, and therefore density, rapidly decreases with altitude up till about 22,000 feet. Knots as a unit of measurement in terms of the airspeed indicator is no longer accurate for measuring airspeed at altitude, and Mach speed is then utilized. In order to determine an accurate airspeed which has the same effects as Mach speed at altitude for an equivalent airspeed at lower altitude, there is an airspeed appropriately called equivalent airspeed, or EAS. Quote, equivalent airspeed is defined as the speed at sea level that would produce the same dynamic pressure as the true airspeed at the altitude at which the vehicle is flying, i.e., air contacting the airframe with equivalent effects. For simplicity, we will use online calculators to demonstrate. But for those who wish to calculate their own data, this is the proper formula to use. For example, Mach 1 at 22,000 feet based on a standard day temperature is 609 knots true airspeed. 0.86 Mach is 522 knots. 522 knots at 22,000 feet, remember, in less dense air, has the same effects on an airframe as 369 knots at sea level in more dense air on a standard day. Big difference at low altitude versus higher altitudes for the same pressure acting on the airframe. As you can see, this is why Boeing derives two airspeed limitations, one in terms of knots, the other in terms of Mach number. Notice the similarity? Again, according to the NTSB, the alleged United 175, reported as a 767, reached a speed of 510 knots. An experiment was allegedly performed in a 767 simulator to observe if such an aircraft can obtain United 175 reported speeds at low altitude. We say allegedly as no information was given to confirm such an experiment took place. However, they claim they were able to accelerate the simulator to 0.86 Mach at 2,000 feet, which is 568 knots for this altitude on a standard day. They claim the simulator was relatively easy to control at such speeds, and their conclusion was, it is highly probable that American 11 and United 175 could easily make the airspeeds quoted in the official reports and as seen in the video footage. They also make the claim 0.86 is the max operating speed for all altitudes, ignoring max operating speed set as 360 knots by Boeing for lower altitudes. Again, what they fail to realize are the effects of air density at high altitudes compared to low, and the reason Boeing assigns two types of airspeed for max operating limits. 0.86 Mach, 568 knots at low altitude, has the same effect on an aircraft as 805 knots or 1.32 Mach at 22,000 feet on a standard day. The researchers who have made such claims based on their alleged simulator experience may want to inform Boeing that their 767s can obtain supersonic Concorde type speeds in a quote flat trajectory and be relatively easy to control in mid-level altitudes. This is what happens when you exceed such maximum operating limits set by the manufacturer. Granted, there is a safety margin built into the maximum operating limits, but there is a reason limits are assigned to aircraft, as you can see here. We now know an unmodified 767 cannot reach speeds reported for the South Tower strike, but it's also impossible for United 175, an unmodified 767, to have continued controlled flight at 150 plus knots over its max operating limit, according to precedent set by Egypt Air 990. So, if this isn't a stock 767, what is it? Was it a modified, beefed-up 767 to obtain such incredible speeds? If so, did 19 Islamic extremists do the modifications in their caves in Afghanistan? The only other possibility here is that the NTSB data for Egypt Air 990 is false, combined with the NTSB calculated radar study for United 175 is also false. If you believe this to be the case, This has grave ramifications for flight safety, and you should think twice about getting on your next flight.